Among the many stories of strange disappearances, there is a small subcategory that involved children being taken and cared for by bears. We were most recently reminded of this phenomenon in early 2019 when a 3-year-old named Casey Hathaway disappeared while playing outside his great-grandmother's house. He was with other children, and apparently he wandered off into the nearby woods. It wasn't long before searchers involving drones, dogs, and helicopters began the search for Casey. In the days that followed, another phenomenon common in disappearances occurred when the area was hit with a slew of bad weather, including freezing temperatures and heavy rains. Approximately 3 days after he disappeared, a neighbor who was out walking her dogs came to an area where she heard the sound of a young boy calling for help. At this point, she alerted the search and rescue team, who came to the area, and after crossing waist-deep water, they found Casey tangled in a thorn bush. Other than some scratches and bruises, the child was completely unharmed. The recovery of Casey was considered a true miracle by the family, considering the bad weather that had occurred while he was lost. In the days that followed, it broke in the news that Casey had quite a story to tell, as he claimed that while he was lost, a bear had taken care of him. Suffice to say that Casey's story about the bear was not taken very seriously, with bear experts stating that it would be unheard of for a bear to nurture something outside its own species. Yet it seems as though something must have cared for the boy, considering the relatively good condition he was in when he was found. What reports did not touch on, however, is the fact that this is far from the first time a bear has reportedly nurtured or taken a missing child. Here are some of those stories. Our first story dates back to August of 1883, when an 18-month-old boy named James Vaughn disappeared in the state of Idaho. A report on this story was published in the Salt Lake Tribune newspaper in a piece titled, "Carried Off by a Bear, an 18-month-old Child Taken into the Mountains and Found Alive and Well the Next Day." The story starts with the young boy's mother doing the family laundry when she realized that her child was missing. She immediately went to the neighbor's house in order to get help. Many neighbors in the area ended up responding, and the search for James began. It was reported on that first day that the searchers came across the tracks of a very large bear. The searchers followed the tracks all day before being forced to call off the search as night fell. By the next morning, searchers were already back on the trail, following the massive bear tracks, and at around 10 a.m. they stumbled upon James, quote, curled up in a bunch of weeds and grass in the bushes, sound asleep, and was in a warm bed of what must have been a very large bear, which had abandoned its captive on approach of the men in search, end quote. James was 4 miles away from the place he disappeared and across very rough terrain. Presumably, any bear carrying a child away would have to do so by carrying him in its mouth. However, James was found completely unharmed. It is important to note in this case that nobody but the young child actually witnessed the supposed kidnapper. Yet the large tracks leading straight to the boy in a makeshift bed speaks for itself. Our next story involves the 2-year-old Ida Mae Curtis, who went missing on July 4th of 1955 in Kootenai National Forest in Montana. Ida Mae's father worked as a logger in the area, and that 4th of July weekend, all the loggers' families came together to celebrate the holiday. Large tents were set up in the area where children could play while the husbands and wives could socialize. That afternoon, Ida Mae and her 9-year-old brother, Cecil, traveled away from the camp. Apparently, Ida Mae saw something in the woods, and she and her brother went to investigate. At the time, they found nothing, so they returned back to one of the large tents, when a large bear came upon them suddenly and grabbed Ida Mae, then ran away, reportedly hopping on 3 legs back into the woods. Ida Mae's own grandfather, Curtis, who was in the area, also verified that around this time he saw what he thought was a bear running into the woods, and it seemed to be carrying something. He had tried to chase after it, but was unable to keep up with its pace. Ida Mae's brother immediately went to the parents with what had just happened, and the search immediately kicked off. Authorities were notified, and hundreds of searchers came out of the woodwork to assist in finding Ida Mae. And as it seems all too common in these situations, bad weather hit the area. Hard rain and even a snowstorm, leaving little hope that the child would be able to survive. Against all odds, however, the very next day Ida Mae was found by searchers roughly 300 yards and across a creek from where she had disappeared. An article in the Spokane Daily Chronicle wrote that Ida Mae was, quote, found in a crude shelter of cedar slashings, which were too heavy for her to lift, end quote, which begs the question, if Ida Mae couldn't make the shelter, who did? The bear? Ida Mae was completely unharmed. No bite marks were found, no scratches. And even though there had been a snowstorm, she was not suffering from the effects of exposure. Many of these stories involving children being taken or cared for by bears are not taken seriously, typically because our only witness is a small child. However, in this story we have an adult eyewitness and Ida Mae's grandfather, who says he saw the beast carrying something. And the detail that the creature was hopping around on 3 legs insinuates that it was doing so because it was using one arm to carry Ida Mae. The idea that a bear was doing this seems almost unbelievable. But if not a bear, then what was it? This story is corroborated by multiple witnesses and the abductee herself. But there is tangible evidence as well. Ida Mae was not wet from crossing the creek, so something had to have carried her. And she was not freezing from the snowstorm, so something had to have kept her warm. This is also not the only strange disappearance involving a crudely built shelter. Obviously, something more intelligent than a bear and stronger than a child created the shelter, but what was it? This case leaves many questions unanswered. Our next story takes us to Boyceville, New York, where in May of 1888, a 2.5-year-old girl with the last name of Davis went missing. And while information on this story is relatively scant, it is no less relevant. A report on her disappearance from her family home in the Catskill Mountains was printed in the New York Times the same year. The girl's father, Millard Davis, took a search party looking for his daughter throughout the day and into the night. But it wasn't until the next day that a trout fisherman, a few miles from the Davis house, came upon Millard Davis's daughter, standing in the middle of a creek, alone. The fisherman rescued the girl and took her back to her parents, where she told her story. When asked where she had slept all night, she reportedly responded that she slept, quote, in the woods with a big bear, end quote. The girl was continually pressured, but never diverted from her story, claiming adamantly that she had been with a bear in the woods and had stayed with it all night. Like others, the Davis girl was unharmed, with no signs that a bear had scratched or bit her in any way. Our final story takes place in Walhalla, Michigan in 1868, where a 3-year-old girl named Katie Flynn went missing. Katie's story was printed in the Ludington Daily. Katie's father, Henry Flynn, ran a lumber camp in the forested area outside Walhalla. Katie often accompanied her father as he worked, and would play and run on the trails in the general vicinity. Sometime during the day, Katie disappeared, and the father did not take notice until he returned home and discovered that Katie was not already there. Immediately, the search for Katie began. Henry Flynn checked the trail that Katie was known to run around on and discovered a set of her tracks slowly merging with a set of huge bear tracks. The area was thoroughly searched until nightfall and then resumed the next day. The search party looked for Katie all day. Then in the late afternoon, they heard a faint cry in the brush close to a nearby river. The men worked their way to the area, and just as they came within view of the river, they heard a loud splash as a huge bear jumped into the water and swam swiftly to the other side. All the while, Katie stood quietly on a tree that had fallen in the midst of the water flow. The searchers rescued Katie and took her back home. She was scratched on her hands and face, but had no other injuries. When the girl was questioned as to what happened to her, she told an incredible story. She said that she was playing around in the sand after her father had left her for a bit, when a large black thing came along and played with her. Then it held out its paw, and she caught a hold of it, and it walked away with her. Just before dark it left her for a little while, and came back with a paw full of wintergreen berries. Both her and the creature ate some of the berries. Then it scraped a big pile of leaves close to her, and lay down with her. Throughout the night it covered her with its body in order to keep her warm. It was also noticed that Katie was missing a shoe. When asked about it, Katie responded that, quote, "The big dog ate it." It is clear that a child as young as Katie would have a very hard time trying to explain exactly what she had seen, referring to the creature as a big black thing and also a big dog, then describing behavior that is almost unfathomable to picture a big dog or bear doing. The adult witnesses in the story describe what they had seen as being a huge bear, but even this explanation falls flat. Bears do not leave to pick berries and hold them in their paws and give them to little girls, or set up makeshift beds for them to sleep in while they are coddled throughout the night. It does not seem out of the realm of possibility that whatever took Katie, she did not have the words to accurately describe, and perhaps the adult witnesses did not truly believe what they saw, so they went to the next closest, most reasonable thing, a bear. Perhaps the adults felt embarrassed if they were to describe what they truly saw, or maybe the events happened too fast for them to accurately get a picture on what they had witnessed. This channel was created to present an unbiased view of real events that have occurred, but I feel like I would be remiss to not cover an alternative theory or explanation. It is already well known that many people believe in a creature called Bigfoot or Sasquatch that could possibly exist in the forests of North America. And when trying to make sense out of these stories, it would seem that the evidence points to its existence. Bears may not nurture something outside its own species, but a bipedal ape-like creature just might, especially when thinking about Katie's story. Why does this make more sense than this? The skeptical answer may be that it's because we have physical evidence or scientific consensus that one exists and the other doesn't. But it doesn't seem logical to assume that a bear did all these things that we know bears can't do, just because the alternative is too much of a taboo subject. The fact is that many people have reported seeing these creatures throughout history and even into the present day, and it seems that these reports we have gone over could possibly be incidents where a child was taken by an as-yet-to-be officially discovered being that exists in these forests. A number of these stories happened a long time ago, which may make sense in a way because the forested areas were larger and fewer cities and people had encroached in the wild areas of North America at that time. We may not have solid answers in these cases, but the questions they bring up are thought-provoking. Are we really to believe that a bear made the shelter Ida Mae stayed in all night? Or that a bear used its arm to carry her as it ran away on 3 legs? Are we truly to believe that a bear picked and fed berries to Katie Flynn? And to think that these incidents are still happening as recently as 2019 is truly incredible. Thanks for watching.